There are lands the world has grown used to seeing with eyes full of pity. In rankings of poverty, in cold analyses written by research institutes, Burkina Faso was once just a faded name on the map, a dry, landlocked place with no sea for trade, no oil for prosperity, and seemingly nothing that could make the world pause for even a second and wonder whether hope still lived there. But sometimes, in the most forgotten lands, extraordinary stories begin. No one expected that from this very Sahel soil, a turning of history would unfold. A nation once seen as having nothing has now become the place the entire continent is watching. Burkina Faso is stepping out of the shadows, not through miracles delivered from the outside, but through the will of its own people. Fields that once lay silent now echo with machines. Villages once swallowed by darkness now shine with light they generated themselves. And at the heart of this transformation, one sentence has become a command for an entire nation. We are not waiting for miracles. We will become the miracle. It is not a political slogan. It is a declaration meant to change fate. A reminder that true recovery does not come from rescue packages, but from the hands of people who've endured for far too long. And the remarkable thing is that this sentence was not born in luxurious conference halls or international signing ceremonies. It rose from tomato processing workshops, from dusty red fields, from small villages that have never appeared on any news map. Those places witnessed the first steps of a rebirth. The question now is not whether Burkina Faso can change. The real question is what made a nation once considered powerless dare to rise and confront an entire history of dependence. What made them believe they could build their own path when so many others remained trapped in the cycles of aid and international pressure? And above all, why did this change begin with a young leader who did not promise grand visions, but simply asked his people to believe in their own strength? Burkina Faso today is no longer just the story of the Burkinabe. It is a challenge thrown at an entire continent. If a nation with so few advantages can rise and rewrite its destiny, what would happen if dozens of other countries did the same? If they stopped waiting for salvation from outside and began creating miracles with their own hands? So before we dive into the journey of what Ibrahim Traoré has done, and how he turned a neglected land into a beacon of self-determination, ask yourself one thing. If Burkina Faso can do it, who still has the right to say it cannot be done? And now, let's step into the story that has shaken the entire African continent. If you are still watching, leave a greeting in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter. In many stories of national revival, people often speak of giant oil fields, groundbreaking scientific discoveries, or major economic agreements that shift history. But in Burkina Faso, the revolution did not begin with anything grand. It did not begin in high-tech meeting rooms or at global economic forums. The spark that ignited change for this entire nation began with something that seemed small and meaningless: a tomato. Imagine the wide fields of the Sahel during harvest season. Even though the soil is nowhere near as fertile as coastal plains, the farmers here work with every bit of strength they have. On cracked, dry land, they plant, they tend, and they wait. And when the tomatoes ripen under the fierce sun, glowing red and full, what should have brought excitement instead brought a deeper burden. Every year, thousands of tons of tomatoes were thrown away right where they were grown. No factories, no market, no buyers. Buckets full of ripe tomatoes were left to rot on the ground, like the forgotten dreams of the Burkinabe. To the outside world, this was only a small detail. But for Burkina Faso, it was a haunting symbol of helplessness. People could produce something, but they could not turn it into value. They created wealth, but could not keep a fair share for themselves. The waste went on for so long that no one believed tomatoes could be anything more than something to be discarded. Until someone appeared who saw what no one wanted to see anymore. Ibrahim Traoré did not see discarded fruit. He saw opportunity. And from that vision came one of the most important decisions of this nation's transformation: to build a tomato processing plant and turn what was once seen as worthless into the red gold of Burkina Faso. The factory was not just an industrial project, it was a message, clear and powerful. Burkina Faso no longer wanted to sell its crops for cheap, no longer wanted to be pressured by foreign markets, no longer wanted to remain a country that only exports raw materials. They wanted to create value, create finished products, and most importantly, create confidence. When the factory began operating, people were stunned. Tomatoes that used to be thrown away were now moving along modern production lines. Young people who had no jobs became trained technicians. Farmers who once struggled with unstable prices signed contracts with steady income. Families changed, communities changed, and then the entire nation began to change. Some said a tomato factory was nothing big. But the truth is that this was the first time Burkina Faso proved it could lift itself with its own hands. One timely decision struck at the nation's weakest point and turned it into the starting point of self-reliance. And from that small factory, hundreds of new stories began painting colors on Burkina Faso that had never appeared before. Because when farmers saw their tomatoes become bottled products sold both at home and abroad, they realized something deeper than profit. They realized their worth was not defined by others. They realized they had the right to dream bigger. And when one person begins to believe in their own value, an entire nation can change. That is the power of something small. A nation does not need to begin with something extraordinary. Sometimes, all it takes is one decision brave enough to break through old beliefs. And the story of that tomato opened the way for a wave of new projects, from transportation to energy, from agriculture to light industry. But above all, it lit a flame inside the Burkinabe that they thought had died long ago, the flame of belief. And from that belief, a rebirth began. There are moments in history when a nation does not change because of resources, aid packages, or complex political deals. It changes because one person dares to say what no one has said and dares to do what no one has done. For Burkina Faso, that person is Ibrahim Traoré. Many people know him as a young officer with steady eyes and a voice that does not tremble, even under the pressure of the entire world. But the reason Traoré became a symbol has nothing to do with his age, his uniform, or his strong speeches. What sets him apart is the way he redefines the word freedom. Freedom is not something given, freedom is something taken. Traoré was born into an ordinary family, with no power and no backing. His youth was not spent in elite European military academies or prestigious training centers. He grew up with the red dust of the Sahel, with stories of farmers struggling to survive, with villages lacking electricity, water, and roads. And perhaps from that, he understood something simple but profound. No one can save Burkina Faso except its own people. When he became a leader, the first thing he did was not delivering speeches or signing agreements. He chose to face the truth. Burkina Faso is not poor because it lacks resources. It is poor because it has grown too used to dependency. Generations lived believing that development must rely on aid, and that mindset trapped many nations inside an invisible box called dependence. Traoré did not bend history, but he dared to bend a way of thinking that had lasted for decades. For him, freedom means a nation that can stand strong even when the whole world turns its back. Freedom means farmers selling their products at a fair price. Freedom means children in remote villages studying under the light, not because of a foreign project, but because the country chose to invest in its own people. His leadership style can be described with one word: action. He rarely speaks about distant futures. He focuses on concrete things people can see with their own eyes. A tomato factory, a road connecting the lowlands to the mountains, a solar station powering 150 villages. For him, each project carries meaning beyond economics. It is a declaration that Burkina Faso can create value, sustain itself, and protect its dignity. What is special about Traoré is the simplicity of how he appears before the people. No formal attire, no display of grandeur, no distance. He walks through fields with farmers, stands beside workers among the machines, visits construction sites without notice. These images are not for publicity. They are his way of truly understanding his country, so that every decision is based not on numbers, but on real lives. But perhaps the reason people trust him so deeply is his consistency between words and actions. When he says he will take no orders, he follows through. When he says a road will be built, the road appears. When he says the country will not depend on others, he immediately starts rebuilding the nation's economy with its own strength. And for a people who have lived through generations of broken promises, that consistency is worth more than any speech. Traoré does not try to become a hero, but by standing with the people, he becomes the voice of change. He is not fighting the world, but he refuses to let the world decide the future of Burkina Faso. And in a time when many nations still tie their future to outside powers, that firmness makes him a figure who redefines sovereignty, dignity, and freedom. Today, when people speak of Burkina Faso's rise, they do not only mention economic projects or growth numbers. They speak of a man who reignited hope in his nation. If a country can change from the smallest things, then a leader can change a nation by recognizing the value in every person, every field, every drop of sweat. And that is exactly what Traoré has done. He did not just build projects. He rebuilt the meaning of freedom. If you want to keep following the journey of the man who breathed new life into an entire nation, if you want to understand the transformation of a nation, look at its roads. A road is not just a place where vehicles pass. It is a lifeline that carries energy through the body of a country. And for a long time, Burkina Faso was a weakened body with blocked arteries. Roads filled with potholes, highways abandoned in the middle of empty fields, bridges collapsing after the rainy season, people in remote regions cut off from the center, crops spoiled because they could not be transported. Businesses hesitated because costs were too high. Burkina Faso was once a nation divided not by borders, but by its own lack of connection. And so, when Ibrahim Traoré began to question what real freedom meant, he did not look first toward the capital. He looked at the roads. He understood that if infrastructure remained clogged, every attempt at economic reform would stay a slogan. To build a new Burkina Faso, the first step was to open the roads that lead to the future. One of the most important projects was the route connecting Burkina Faso to Côte d'Ivoire. A landlocked country like Burkina has always depended on its neighbors to reach international markets, but the old road was too slow, too damaged, too expensive, and dangerously unreliable. Every shipment felt like a gamble. Traders lost time, costs rose, farmers suffered, products lost value. Poverty repeated itself like an endless cycle. When the new road was built and completed, Burkina Faso gained more than a route. It gained an escape. Transporting goods 30% faster was not just a statistic. It was opportunity. It was proof that local produce could reach the market on time. It was reduced costs for businesses and increased competitiveness. It was trucks leaving the Sahel at a steady pace, no longer forced to stop for endless potholes or landslides. Regions once seen as forgotten were now connected to economic centers. People who used to spend an entire day reaching the nearest town now did it in hours. Traders who once walked away returned because they saw new possibilities. Communities once isolated were now part of the national flow of commerce. But even more important was the shift in mindset. Because a road does not only move vehicles, it moves belief. When farmers saw a wide road cutting across their land, they understood they were no longer left behind. When businesses saw transport costs drop, they understood the country was truly building its foundation for growth. When children in small villages saw lines of vehicles moving with purpose, they understood their home had a different future. One road creates connection. Many roads create the strength of an economy, and that is what Traoré pursued. He did not want Burkina Faso to rely on a handful of major routes. He wanted an infrastructure network that tied the entire nation together from the northern desert to the southern fields. Better roads increase trade, more trade creates jobs. Jobs improve living standards, and improved living standards lead to stability for the whole society. Burkina Faso is building infrastructure not only to improve transport, but to free itself from the chains of dependence. A road to the sea is not just a path for goods, it is a path for a new way of thinking. For the first time in decades, people believe where Russia continues to deepen its ties and it comes from the brave choices of their own nation. When people look at the new asphalt stretching across the Sahel, they do not just see pavement. They see the efforts of an entire nation determined to step out of the dark. Every new meter of road is a declaration that Burkina Faso refuses to accept its old role. Every new bridge is a promise that no matter how hard things get, they will continue to build. These roads do more than connect Burkina Faso to the world. They connect its past to its future. And under the Sahel sunlight gleaming on the fresh asphalt, the people know their journey has only just begun. The Sahel is a land where the sun never rests. Every day, from morning until dusk, its light pours over dry branches, cracked earth, and quiet villages scattered across windswept plains. For generations, that sunlight was seen as an enemy. It burned the crops, drained the land, and exposed the fragility of communities living under a harsh and unforgiving sky. But then, through the vision of a leader determined to break every limit, the sun stopped being a burden. It became Burkina Faso's greatest asset. That was when Ibrahim Traoré launched an energy revolution unlike anything the country had ever seen. He looked at the Sahel, at the sky that shines relentlessly above it, and asked a question no one had ever asked with real conviction. Why must we import energy when this light is above us every single day? And that question became the beginning of a new chapter for the entire nation. Solar projects began rising one after another, not in the capital first, not in the more prosperous regions, but in small villages where people had lived for generations without ever seeing an electric light. In these places, every night was complete darkness, lit only by flickering fire. Children stopped studying when the sun went down. Doctors could not work after dusk. Life came to a halt, as if the entire world froze simply because light was missing. When the first solar panels were laid down, many villagers hid their doubt. They had seen too many broken promises, too many unfinished projects, too many kinds of help that came and vanished. But this time was different. The work moved fast, steady, and full of determination. In just a few months, more than 150 villages had electricity. And for the first time in decades, night in the Sahel was no longer an absolute black. Imagine a night in Burkina Faso when a small village lights up for the first time. Children run out to watch the bulbs glow like tiny miracles. Elders sit at their doorways, staring at the light they once believed existed only in distant places beyond their reach. The soft yellow lamps do more than illuminate the path. They illuminate belief. And in that moment, people understood that change was truly coming to them, not from the pity of outsiders, but from the bold decisions of their own nation. Electricity does more than brighten the night. It carries hope. Water pumps run steadily so farmers can irrigate their crops with confidence. Small shops stay open into the evening, bringing families more income. Many women start craft workshops using electric tools to work at night when the air is cooler. School lessons last longer, offering a new future for the young. And most importantly, solar power saves Burkina Faso millions of dollars in oil imports every year. The nation becomes less dependent, more secure, more confident. But the greatest meaning of this energy revolution does not lie in the number of megawatts produced. It lies in the shift of mindset. For the first time, people saw clearly that they could live better using what their own land already offered. No oil fields, no massive dams. Burkina Faso only needed the Sunday, a resource it had from the beginning, only waiting to be turned into strength. Ibrahim Traoré did what many leaders before him never dared. He built a future from a resource the world had overlooked. He proved that even in the hardest conditions, a nation can find its own path forward, as long as it has the will and the wisdom to see true value. Today, as solar panels shine across the Sahel sands, the people of Burkina understand that they received more than electricity. They received belief. Belief that their country can stand on its own. They received the right to choose their future, a right long taken from them by reliance on foreign energy. And that is what makes this energy revolution a turning point. A nation once living in darkness is now lighting itself. And that light no longer comes only from the sun, but from the hearts of people who believe in a new future. If you're following this journey and want to continue exploring the foundations that transformed an entire nation, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel to move on to the next chapter. The transformation of a nation is not measured only by numbers or by new buildings rising from the ground. It is measured by how people's lives shift by changes in their eyes, in their voices, in their meals, and in dreams they once thought were gone forever. In Burkina Faso, the reforms of Ibrahim Traoré did more than build infrastructure or energy systems. They created deep, widespread change across every group, every community, every life. And there, we see the true power of a self-reliant model. The first group to benefit the most is the farmers. For decades, Burkina Faso's farmers were trapped in a cycle of unstable prices, weak markets, and unpredictable seasons. They worked without stopping, yet their income was never enough to change their lives. When the tomato processing plant began operating and agricultural projects were implemented consistently, these farmers finally had the chance to escape the uncertainty of the market. Tomatoes were no longer left to rot in the fields. Agricultural products were bought at stable prices. Contracts were signed. Income became reliable. A farming family could send a child to study in town for the first time. A father could repair a roof he once only patched. The change was quiet but powerful. The second group to benefit is the workers. From factory employees to the crews digging foundations for solar stations, from young engineers supervising road projects to machine operators on construction sites, all found new opportunities. When the economy runs on domestic production, the demand for labor rises sharply, bringing stable incomes with it. In the past, many young people had to leave their villages for cities or foreign countries, facing danger and uncertainty. Now, they can stay home and still find a path forward. A steady job may not be a grand dream, but for hundreds of thousands, it is the first step toward feeling in control of their own lives. The third group is local businesses. From small roadside shops to newly opened workshops, all were strengthened by better infrastructure and reliable energy. When transportation becomes faster and cheaper, businesses can expand their markets. When construction and production increase, enterprises that once barely survived can finally grow. A rural mechanics workshop can secure a maintenance contract for a solar project. A small transport company can buy more trucks and hire more drivers. A local store can open a second location because the population is becoming more active and prosperous. They do not need to compete in a massive market. They just need the chance to grow on their own soil. The final group is the remote communities, those who never believed their nation would remember them. For them, change did not come only in the form of roads or electricity. It came from the feeling of being seen, heard, and empowered. A village with electricity is no longer swallowed by fear at night. A woman can open a small bakery and sell bread in the evening. Children can study under proper light. Community meetings become lively because people feel their future is finally within reach. Most importantly, once isolated regions can now join the country's shared development path. Ripple effects are not instant. They are like waves spreading from a single stone dropped into still water. The farther they travel, the wider they grow, creating movement that is quiet but unstoppable. Burkina Faso is living through that ripple. From small projects to major works, from the tomato factory to the network of roads and solar fields, every change started from a single common will. The will to stand on their own, the will to stop depending on others, the will to build a future with their own strength. And as each group, each family, each community begins to feel the impact of these reforms, something important happens. The nation begins to believe in itself. In every debate about the rise of a nation, emotions can move people and stories can inspire belief, but in the end, only data can prove, beyond any doubt, that a new path is truly opening. In Burkina Faso, something remarkable has happened. Numbers that once carried the grey weight of poverty and decline have now become the strongest evidence that a new development model is not just possible, but already working. Not in some distant future. Not in thick proposal documents. But right now, let's start where the transformation began, the tomato processing plant. In a country that once threw away thousands of tons of crops every year, this factory created a clear turning point. More than 150 stable jobs were created within 3 years. That number may seem small in a major economy, but for Burkina Faso, it was the first movement of an entire wheel. More importantly, farmers' incomes doubled thanks to fixed purchase contracts. The number of farmers earning reliable income from tomatoes increased by more than 100%. All these numbers point to one truth. A nation can transform its entire economic structure simply by respecting and unlocking the true value of its local produce. But the story does not stop at agriculture. Some of the most important data comes from transportation and trade. The road linking Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire has cut transport time by about 30%. This did more than save millions of dollars. It made Burkina Faso's agricultural products more competitive in the region. After the road was inaugurated, trade volume between the two countries rose by roughly 15% in less than 2 years. These numbers are like a door thrown wide open, allowing Burkina Faso to enter the regional market with its own strength instead of dependence. In energy, the data is even more convincing. Before, nearly 80% of rural populations lived in darkness, relying on expensive, unsafe kerosene. But in less than 5 years, more than 150 villages were electrified with solar energy. That translates to millions of dollars saved from imported fuel. Villages with stable electricity saw their incomes rise by nearly 20% in the first year alone. The ripple effect made solar energy not just a technical solution, but a true engine of economic growth. Another indicator, quieter but no less important, is the rise of small and medium-sized enterprises. Before, they appeared and disappeared quickly because operational costs were too high. But with improved infrastructure, stable energy, and a strengthened domestic market, the number of new businesses increased by nearly 40% in 2 years. These are not symbolic numbers. They are signs of an economy lifting itself through the creativity of its own people. Beyond the economy, social data also shows major shifts. The percentage of children able to study at night rose by nearly 60% in newly electrified regions. Emergency cases treated on time increased sharply as clinics began operating through the night. These numbers reflect a simple truth. When a nation has better infrastructure and better energy, opportunities for a better life move closer to every citizen. Data does not create emotion, but it proves that the people's emotions are real. Data does not tell stories, but it confirms that Burkina Faso's story is not a fantasy. Every percentage point of growth, every shift in the numbers is a mark etched into this country's journey of rebirth, a journey that is not perfect, not easy, but undeniably powerful. And all these numbers lead us to one conclusion. Burkina Faso is not just talking about self-reliance. They are achieving it, not through miracles, not through promises, but through evidence clear and undeniable. No development model, no matter how powerful, can avoid debate, and the rise of Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré is no exception. When one of the poorest nations in the world declares that it can stand on its own without aid, it does more than surprise people. It shakes an entire way of thinking. And when a new model challenges a global order that has existed for decades, criticism is inevitable. Some experts question whether the self-reliance Burkina Faso is pursuing can truly last. They raise familiar arguments that Burkina's economy is too small to withstand natural disasters, that a lack of financial resources will slow progress, that without international support, a poor nation will struggle to protect its gains. These concerns are not baseless. The Sahel is a harsh region with unpredictable weather, where droughts can destabilize an agriculture-dependent economy. History has shown many African nations facing difficulties when trying to break free from dependency. But to look only at these challenges and conclude that self-reliance is unsustainable is to apply an old mindset to a reality that is changing. Supporters of Traoré's model present arguments that are sharp and convincing. They do not claim that Burkina Faso is perfect. They simply say the country is finally walking on its own legs instead of leaning on a crutch that grows weaker every year. The first argument is that self-reliance is not a destination, it is a process. Burkina Faso has never said it does not need the world. What it said is that it does not want the world to decide its future. There is a massive difference between the two. Self-reliance does not mean isolation. It means a nation has the right to choose its own development path instead of following imported models that have failed repeatedly across the continent. The second argument comes from the data the country itself has generated. Solar energy has freed Burkina Faso from expensive imports. Reorganized agriculture has given farmers stable incomes. Infrastructure has given local businesses a competitive edge. These numbers cannot be denied. An unsustainable model cannot produce changes this fast and this deep. A failing model cannot pull hundreds of communities into the orbit of development. Another common criticism is that Burkina Faso is vulnerable to global shocks. But supporters look at this from the opposite angle. They argue that aid is what makes a country vulnerable because when funding is cut or tied to conditions, entire economies collapse. Meanwhile, a model built on internal strength, though slower, creates a more solid foundation because it is based on what the country truly possesses. Real strength does not come from conditional loans or political promises that shift with the winds. History across Africa has also proven something important. The nations that received the most aid are not necessarily the ones that developed the fastest. Those that relied on their own capacity from the beginning often faced fewer long-term obstacles. When people are empowered to take ownership, they move with the change instead of watching it from the sidelines. And that social element is what gives any model its durability. What makes the Burkina Faso debate interesting is that the supporters never claim the road ahead will be easy. They openly acknowledge the country will face natural disasters, global downturns, and geopolitical pressure. But they ask a different question. Without self-reliance, how would Burkina Faso face these challenges? With aid that eventually runs out? With commitments that shift with politics? Or with its own strength? They believe that although the self-reliance path is difficult, it is the only one that allows a nation to stand firm in a changing world. Ultimately, the debate about the sustainability of self-reliance is not meant to prove that Burkina Faso has already succeeded completely. It is meant to show that the country is finally choosing its own future. And in a world full of instability, having the power to choose is the strongest foundation a nation can have. If you want to continue exploring how the Burkina Faso model is shaping the future of Africa and inspiring millions, leave a comment and subscribe to follow the next chapter. There are moments in history when change does not begin in a superpower, does not emerge from a major economy, but rises from a place no one ever believed could make a sound. Burkina Faso is one of those moments. A small nation with no coastline, no oil, no fertile deltas once dismissed by the world has now become a source of inspiration for an entire continent. This is not the randomness of history. It is the result of a journey in which every step carries the weight of resistance, self-reliance, and a determination to escape a darkness that lasted for generations. The rise of Burkina Faso is not just an internal story. It touches the deepest wounds of the continent. For decades, Africa has been defined by dependency. Dependency on aid, dependency on unequal trade structures, dependency on international financial institutions, and perhaps most painfully, dependency on the belief that Africans cannot develop without the guiding hand of global powers. But when Burkina Faso declared it wanted to stand on its own and, more importantly, began doing it, an invisible bell rang across the continent. In West African nations like Mali, Niger, and Guinea, young people began asking questions. Why can't we do the same? Why can a small country like Burkina challenge the old order while larger and richer nations cannot? These questions did not just create admiration. They sparked a wave of ambition to break out of old patterns that had held nations back for decades. Farmers in Senegal looked at Burkina Faso's tomato factory and realized they too could build plants to process peanuts, onions, and everything they had been selling raw for cheap. Youth in Ghana watched Burkina Faso produce its own solar power and began dreaming of green energy projects in their own towns. Women in Nigeria heard about electrified villages and wondered why they still lived in darkness despite their country's wealth. The real transformation was not in numbers, it was in mindset. And that mindset is spreading like a quiet, steady flame. More importantly, Burkina Faso is not rising by confronting the world. It is rising by confronting its own past. It is a rise rooted in dignity, and dignity has a powerful ripple effect. When one nation stands up for its own worth, those around it feel awakened. They realize dependency is not destiny. They realize they can choose. And when that belief takes root, change becomes inevitable. Even more striking is that Burkina Faso has created a model many African nations feel fits their reality. No complex technology, no massive capital, no distant political commitments. The model rests on three things any nation can possess: available resources, internal will, and consistent leadership. Burkina Faso proved that when these three elements merge into a single force, a country can step out of the shadows of poverty and into the light of freedom. Many international analysts are now forced to rethink how they approach Africa. If one of the poorest nations in the Sahel can develop on its own terms, what could stronger, richer countries achieve if they shifted their mindset? This puts pressure on global institutions long accustomed to shaping the flow of aid. Africa is beginning to understand that true power does not lie in financial commitments, but in the ability of each nation to choose its own direction. And perhaps the most meaningful impact is on the youth. Young Africans are looking at Burkina Faso with new eyes. They no longer see a poor country, they see a courageous one. They no longer see scarcity, they see freedom. And that shift is reshaping the continent. Because Africa's future does not live in conferences or political documents. It lives in the belief of its young people that this continent can create its own miracles. Burkina Faso may not be large in size, in economy, or in military strength. But in spirit, in the will to stand tall, it has become a guide for an Africa longing to break its invisible chains. One small nation, through its determination, has made an entire continent look inward. And sometimes that is exactly how history begins to change. The future of a nation never moves in a straight line. It is always shaped by choices, risks, opportunities, and unpredictable forces from the outside world. Burkina Faso is no different. After a period of powerful transformation, the country is now entering a sensitive stretch of time where every decision can shape a new chapter of history. And when experts look at Burkina Faso's trajectory, they often divide its near future into three clear scenarios: the stable scenario, the accelerated scenario, and the pressured scenario. Each one is grounded in reality, and each carries deep lessons about the self-reliance Burkina Faso is pursuing. The first scenario is the stable scenario. This is considered the natural path if Burkina Faso continues its current momentum without major shocks from the outside environment. In this case, key projects, solar energy, transportation, infrastructure, and agricultural processing continue to expand in a controlled and steady way. The country maintains the positive results it has built while strengthening the foundation of self-reliance. As electrification spreads, more remote regions gain the chance to develop. New roads continue to reduce transport costs and expand cross-border trade. In this scenario, the economy does not grow explosively, but it moves forward step by step like a well-oiled machine, running smoothly and reliably. Most importantly, public confidence continues to rise, creating a stable social foundation for the next stages of progress. The second scenario is the accelerated scenario. This is the outcome many people hope for, because it could turn Burkina Faso into the fastest growing, internally driven development model in West Africa. In this situation, the country receives outside cooperation in the form of fair, condition-free trade agreements. International investors begin to see the potential of Burkina Faso's self-reliant model and pour capital into sectors such as renewable energy, agricultural processing, environmental technology, and logistics. If this happens, major infrastructure will develop faster, local industrial zones could emerge, and exports would grow significantly. Solar villages would become hubs of a broad green economic network. Young people would gain more skilled jobs, shifting the labor structure from low skill to technical. In this scenario, Burkina Faso does not just stand firm, it rises, and more importantly, it becomes a symbol of independent development, inspiring surrounding nations. The third scenario, the one the people of Burkina Faso hope will not become reality, is the pressured scenario. This is what happens when external forces weigh heavily on the economy. A long drought could weaken agriculture. A global energy crisis could raise the cost of equipment. Regional instability or geopolitical tensions could disrupt trade routes. In this scenario, the country may struggle to maintain project timelines. Farmers' incomes could drop. Some new initiatives might have to pause. But even in this difficult situation, Burkina Faso still has an essential anchor: the internal foundations built over the past years. These allow the nation to avoid falling into deep recession as it once did, and more importantly, they prove a simple truth. When a nation learns to stand on its own feet, even hard times cannot easily knock it down. These three scenarios are not meant to predict the future with optimism or pessimism. They exist to remind us that the future is shaped by choice. Burkina Faso has chosen the path of self-reliance. And that choice turns the three scenarios into three branches that can be shaped and guided by the decisions of the Burkinabe people themselves. If they stay united, keep faith in the current model, and protect transparency and leadership, the country moves closer to the accelerated scenario. If they remain patient and steady, they will maintain stability. And if major challenges arise, they will still have the foundation to endure. The future is not something that happens to Burkina Faso. The future is something Burkina Faso is building with its own hands. If you want to continue following the strategic choices that will shape the nation's long journey ahead, leave a comment and subscribe to join the next chapter. When a nation is already standing on the edge of powerful transformation, the most important question is no longer how to start the change, but how to sustain it, strengthen it, and turn it into a long-term direction. After the bold steps taken under Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso has laid the foundation for a rare model of self-reliance in modern Africa. But a foundation is only the beginning. A house can only stand through storms if its pillars are strong. And Burkina Faso's future is no different. To protect what has been achieved and expand it into a sustainable development model, the country must continue reinforcing 5 essential pillars. The first pillar is infrastructure. In any economy, roads, bridges, transport networks, and logistics systems form the backbone of growth. In Burkina Faso, this is even more crucial, because the country is landlocked and depends on trade corridors through neighboring nations. Finishing and expanding cross-border routes, maintaining high-quality domestic roads, and developing new logistics hubs will create a strong boost for trade. Good infrastructure not only helps crops reach markets faster, it attracts businesses, stimulates job creation, and increases household income. Burkina Faso's future depends heavily on its ability to turn today's roads into a powerful commercial network connecting all of West Africa. The second pillar is energy. A nation that depends on external supply cannot speak of self-reliance. Burkina Faso has taken an important first step by bringing solar power to more than 150 villages, but that is only the opening chapter. To ensure economic stability, support businesses, help farmers access technology, and give children proper learning environments, the country must scale clean energy to an industrial level. This will not only reduce fuel imports, it could eventually position Burkina Faso as a regional energy provider, exporting solar electricity to neighbors. The Sahel sun is not just light, it can become a strategic national resource. The third pillar is education and training. Without skilled people, every major project is nothing more than concrete. A developing nation needs young people who know how to operate machinery, manage businesses, analyze data, conduct research, and innovate. Burkina Faso must focus on skill-based learning, vocational training, technical schools, and creating pathways for youth to enter new industries. When rural children study under electric light for the first time, that is only the beginning. The next step is building an environment where they can become the generation that transforms solar energy into industry, agriculture into high-value products, and the nation into a new production hub for the region. The fourth pillar is technology and digital transformation. The modern world does not run only on machines and manual labor, it runs on data, smart systems, and connected networks. Burkina Faso has the opportunity to leap ahead by investing in agricultural tech, smart energy management, digital platforms for businesses, and online public services for citizens. Digital transformation is not a luxury. It is how farmers get better prices, small businesses reach larger markets, and governments manage resources transparently. A nation that uses technology wisely can shorten a development path that would otherwise take decades. The final pillar is economic diversification. Any economy that depends too heavily on one sector becomes vulnerable to shocks. Burkina Faso must grow multiple economic engines, from agricultural processing to ecotourism, from renewable energy to light manufacturing. Each sector contributes to overall stability. When a country has many industries, many sources of income, and many opportunities for its youth, its economy becomes flexible, resilient, and far less exposed to external disruptions. These 5 pillars are not just a plan, they are the compass for the future. And if Burkina Faso stays committed to them, it will not only preserve today's achievements, it will open a new chapter in which the nation is no longer a follower, but a guiding force for an Africa that longs for self-determination. There are moments in history when a nation stands before 2 choices. Either continue living as it always has, holding on to a fragile hope that someone from the outside will come to the rescue, or step out of the darkness, even if the road ahead is difficult, and declare that from this moment on, they will wait for no one to save them. Burkina Faso is living in that very moment. A rare moment when a nation no longer looks at its future through the eyes of a beggar, but through the gaze of a creator. From the tomatoes once left to rot in the fields to the roads cutting across the Sahel, from villages drowned in darkness to the light of hundreds of solar stations, Burkina Faso has proven that miracles are not things that fall from the sky. A miracle is something people create when they choose to face a bitter reality and decide to transform it with their hands, their determination, and their pride in who they are. What makes this story unforgettable is not the size of the projects, but the powerful shift in mindset. People no longer see poverty as destiny, no longer see aid as the only lifeline, no longer see the outside world as the unquestioned guide. A nation has learned to stand on its own, and when a nation achieves that, everything else can change. Farmers are no longer planting just to survive. They plant with the belief that their products have value, that their country will buy, process, and export them under its own name. Workers are no longer merely searching for jobs. They have become essential links in a new economy taking shape. Children growing up under electric light are not just learning to read and write. They know their lives can stretch far beyond the limits of their villages. Women are no longer standing behind. They are creators, leaders, and drivers of community change. Burkina Faso is no longer mentioned for poverty or instability. It is spoken of as a symbol of rebirth, a nation whose people grew tired of waiting and chose action instead. A nation that challenges old assumptions on the continent and proves that development is not the privilege of resource-rich countries. Development is the privilege of those who dare to see their true strengths, build them, and protect them. From the Sahel, Burkina Faso's story spreads like a fresh wind. It carries a simple but powerful message for Africa. A nation does not need to be saved. It only needs the chance to save itself. And when that chance comes from its own will, everything becomes possible. The story of Burkina Faso reminds us that change does not always begin in powerful nations. Sometimes it begins in a place the world never expected, in a land once considered forgotten. But it is exactly these places that often give humanity its deepest lessons. There is no weak nation, only nations that have never been trusted to believe in their own strength. And today, as the world looks toward Burkina Faso, it is forced to admit one truth. This nation created its own miracle. Not with gold, not with oil, not with massive aid packages, but with the belief, courage, and resolve of a people who refuse to bow their heads. Burkina Faso still has a long journey ahead. There will be challenges, there will be hardships, but they have already stepped out of their darkest era. And once the light has been lit, darkness can no longer swallow them. This rebirth has only just begun, and the beauty of it is that it no longer depends on anyone else. It rests entirely in their own hands. If you believe stories like this deserve to be shared, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe. Every act of support helps the voice of self-reliance, belief, and awakening nations reach farther than ever before.